So, good morning, aspirants. I am Dr. Santhosh Babu. I'm an IAS officer of the 1995 batch of the Tamil Nadu cadre. Took VRs in 2020, and I'm now teaching for Unacademy. I'm extremely happy to touch base with all of you. I'll be teaching public administration in Unacademy as an optional subject. I hope, one of the recommendations of the Basman committee is that we have 46 optionals or 48 optionals. But what the aspirant requires are just two options. One is public administration and second is law. Essentially, these are the items which you deal with on a daily basis as an IAS officer. So all of the optionals should be removed is what the Basman committee has said. So all those who are considering public administration as optional, I think you are a visionary. You're taking the right decision because at some point of time, this is going to be. Anyways, let me welcome you to this class of mine. This will be from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. And I hope you will stay with me throughout the conversation that we'll have. The whole idea is to enthuse you towards this optional called public administration. And as you know, those who have researched this particular subject would know that there are two papers. Paper one, which is called the administrative theory, which is around 12 chapters, and second paper is called Indian administration. So basically, the theory and application. These are the two parts of public administration. There are certain books to be read, not many books, but listening to a class would be extremely useful because we try to filter out from different sources and try to give it to you as a capsule. And in listening to the class, taking notes, etc., would be extremely useful to you. So let me begin the class. Chapter 1 will have around 12 chapters, but paper 1 has around 12 chapters, but around 4 to 5 chapters we are taking in paper 2 because it has to go through a logical way so that you understand it in its entirety. Right, so let's start off by looking at this chapter itself. So there's introduction, meaning, nature, scope, and significance of public administration, evolution of public administration and its current status, Woodrow Wilson's view on public administration, new public administration, public choice approach, new public management. LPG is liberalization, privatization, globalization, and good governance. Again, understand it. What is MB is Mohit Bhattacharya is a book that you possibly need to read. On the theory people, on the 20 theorists, you need to read, definitely read Prasad and Prasad at least 10 to 15 times so that, it gets ingrained in you, those theories. So these are the two books that you possibly need to read when you try to understand these chapters. And today we are going to take meaning, nature, scope, and significance of public administration. Okay, I hope you're with me. So, when you are talking about public administration, you need to know what is administration. Then only you can go to public administration. But if you have to understand administration, you need to understand what is meant by an organization. Because administration is after the organization is set up. Organization is a physical thing. Administrative is the software part of it. Speaking, getting things done, decision making, moving files, all those kinds of things. Right. So to understand public administration, and the public part is very, very significant. The public and the administration part, we'll try to make you understand that. Okay. You also need to know the definitions which different thinkers have given on public administration. What are the features of public administration? What is the nature of public administration? What's the scope of public administration? What is the significance of public administration? So meaning, nature, scope, significance. Before that, we'll do a little definition and try to understand what is organization, then go on to administration, then go on to public administration. Right? So this is the way we will be moving in today's class. So administration means what? Or organization means what? Essentially, human beings are very interdependent, right? You will not do many things on your own, except a few things. You may eat your food or, have ablutions, but rest of the stuff is dependent on others. You can't do anything because there are inbuilt limitations for human beings. They have to be dependent on each other. So when two or more people come together in a voluntary manner, not pushed together, in a voluntary manner and with common objectives, and they coordinate with each other, then an organization is formed. Right? So let's assume that you're a startup, you're an individual, and you're going to start something. But you need a few people with you, right? couple of people. If you're a visionary, then you need somebody to program your product or service. Then you need to go to the registrar of companies. You need to do a lot of stuff. So one person cannot do it. Of course, you kind of hear stories about a single person building an entire house all by himself in 2 or 3 years. Those are exceptions. He's just trying to prove a point that I can do carpentry, I can do masonry, I can do artistic work, I can do the design, I can do the engineering. It's just to prove a point, but not necessary for him to do all that. He could have finished that house in 3 or 4 months had he coordinated with a set of people. So when 2 or more people come together in a voluntary manner to realize common objectives, so that's the most important thing. If you don't have a common objective, it becomes a discussion club, right? Just keep on talking, but nothing will be achieved because of that. Organizations are formed, right? Why do people come together? Because they cannot survive without the help of others because of inbuilt limitations. This is a very simple definition of organization. Now we understand it? Right. Now what are there in organizations? So when an organization has to be formed, you always need to establish objectives. Why your organization is being formed? For example, why is Unacademy being formed? It's to provide high quality education to youngsters across the country, across the world. So that's the objective. So that being the objective, then we need to create the organization, right? So formulation of objective is the first one. Second is planning. Why do you want to plan? Very obvious. You need to plan because resources are limited, right? You don't have enough resources. You need to prioritize. And you say there are 100 things in your bucket that you need to do, but you have only a few crores in hand, which can help you achieve 10 of those objectives. Then obviously you need to prioritize which are the first 10 items that you'll do, and next year what are the first another 10 items you do. So that planning is necessary because resources are scarce, right? Then you also need to put in place what is called an office order or service rules. In government, it's called office order, and service rules are there for the corporations, etc., which will state what are the objects of the organization, who will occupy what position, what is the hierarchy, etc., right? What subjects they will deal with. Everybody will not deal with every subject. So you go to an office, let's say you go to a sub-collector's office, you'll have a sub-collector. Let me take sub-collector. Oh, that's not right now. You'll have a sub-collector. He'll be sitting here. Right? So below him there will be a few levels of people. This is the pyramid. At the lower level are the assistants. Let's say here the peons. Then the assistants. Assistant 1, A1, A2, A3, A4. Then for 2 assistants there will be 1 superintendent. So superintendent. This person will report to your next level, which is what? Which is your PA or somebody. Then he will put it. So basically, all these people have to be given different subjects. That's the office order. So this is written down as an office order. And without this, there will be absolute chaos in the office, right? How do I rub it off? Let me see whether I can rub it off. Yeah. I got a rubber here and a eraser which I can use to rub it off. I hope you're seeing what I'm writing. There is a response. There are not many people watching this. So then you have what's called the division of labor. I said no, A3, then superintendent. So that division of labor and hierarchy. Hierarchy means you are reporting to somebody, right? That relationship between the superior and the subordinate. That's called hierarchy, right? That has to be there. Then you also need specialists, right? You can't have all journalists. You might be a journalist, but you need a specialist who will take care of this particular activity. So you need specialization. So to fill up all these posts, you need to go through what's called a recruitment process, right? You have to recruit peons, you have to recruit assistants, you have to recruit superintendents, you have to recruit, or you have to promote people to different positions. Okay, promotion is also part of it. Recruitment and promotion. These comes under what is called personnel management, right? Then you need to familiarize those people who have been recruited with the office. You need to familiarize themselves with each other. You need to familiarize themselves with the hierarchy. You need to familiarize them with the objectives. And you also need to familiarize them with the sense of purpose, right? So that you give them what's called training. You also need financing. Now they say an organization minus finance, it can be a discussion club. Will be a discussion club. So the finance is at the heart of an organization. Without finance, no organization exists. You do everything. You do the objectives, you do the hierarchy, you do the everything. But still, there's no money. The organization will not exist, right? So that's very important to understand. Then, obviously, you have created the policies and you're going to implement, right? And you also need how the implementation is going. So that's why you do what's called a performance evaluation. So, administration may be defined as the aggregate or sum of all activities performed in an organization. So, please understand this because different people have come out with different definitions. There's a managerial view, there's an integral view, etc. We'll come to that, right? I hope you're with me on this. So, Latin word administrare meaning to serve. So, basically, if all of you are aspiring to become IAS officers, civil servants, etc., then your objective is to serve. That's why the IAS is called the Indian Administrative Service, IPS is called the Indian Police Service, Indian Forest Service, Indian Foreign Service. Look, all these are services. So you're basically a servant to the people of India because you're being paid by the taxes that they pay. You have to keep that in mind, right? Now, what are the definitions? Different definitions have been given by different thinkers. I just want you to keep this in mind that there are different thinkers. Apart from the 21 thinkers that you'll be definitely studying in Prasad and Prasad, you might have to quote some of these definitions which are given by other thinkers. We don't go deep into them. We just know that these thinkers existed and they gave such definitions, right? So there's Gladden who said public administration means determined action taken in pursuit of a conscious purpose. We said the objectives, right? A determined action. It's a simplistic definition. Gulick is a person who came out of the Portscob idea. That's planning, organizing, etc. So Luther Gulick said administration has to do with getting things done with the accomplishment of defined objectives. So there's a defined objective, get things done. That's what Luther Gulick says. Herbert Simon is a person who actually came out of there and said that all these thinkers have come out with proverbs. He just debunked them, all their theories, and said public administration is all about decision making. So defined administration is activities of groups of people cooperating with each other to accomplish common objectives or goals. Dwight Waldo is a person who made the biggest cut against the classical thinkers of those times. You're talking about Taylor, you're talking about Weber, you're talking about Urwig, Gulick, or Henry Fayol, etc. And he says public administration is an art and science of management as applied to the affairs of the state. These are questions have been asked on this. Why is public administration called an art and a science together? And then immediately what should come to your mind is Dwight Waldo. Of course, we'll be reading more about Dwight Waldo when we come to what is new public administration. You can't go ahead and read new public administration without understanding the life and times of Dwight Waldo. Okay, so that is Dwight Waldo for you. Then Fifner, very important definition. What are the factors of production? The factors of production are land. Factors of production are land, labor, capital. Land, labor, capital, and one more thing is entrepreneurship. So land and capital are land and capital what? Land and material resources. Material labor resources. And entrepreneurship are labor human resources. So organizing and directing these material and human resources to achieve our desired goals is what Fifner said. F.M. Marx, not Karl Marx. F.M. Marx says divine administration has determined action taken in pursuit of a common purpose. I think that's the same thing given by Gladden also. Right? And L.D. White is considered one of the pioneers in public administration and father of public administration in America. He says consists of all operations having for the purpose the fulfillment or enforcement of public policy. Different ways of thinking. It's ultimately the same. You're bringing people together, common objectives, cooperating and achieving the desired result. And Paul Appleby was one of the public administrators, political scientists who ultimately came to India to help us come out of the 5-year plans, etc. He said, without administration, government would be a discussion club, if indeed it could exist at all. Paul Appleby. You have to remember Paul Appleby. Sorry. Then Herbert Simon. Public administration is meant in common usage the executive branches of national, state, and local government. So Herbert Simon is coming out with a very narrow definition. Very narrow definition. That's why it's called the managerial view. Simon came out with what's called the managerial. Anything which is managerial is public administration. Managerial is public administration. Managerial view. And there's something called integral view also. So what Simon is saying is essentially that what is performed above this is public administration. Whereas the integral view states that everything done here is public administration. So this is the integral view. And this managerial view has been debunked, saying everybody has debunked it. Simon is one of the biggest thinkers in public administration, but even he came to this conclusion that the managerial view is here, right? So that's why we need to know every aspect of every thinker, right? Right. Now, Woodrow Wilson, one of the most important and the father of public administration, considered as the father of the discipline of public administration. He says a detailed and systematic application of law. Simple. Detailed and systematic. Anything which is not lawful is not public administration. Every particular application of law is an act of administration. And he also says it's the most obvious part of government. Administration is the most obvious part of government. It's government in action. It's executed, the operator, and the most visible side of government. And that's where we'll have a little tinkering when we define Wilson, because he says if it is the most operative part of the government and the most visible side of government, then why is it not that this is not studied? Is a question he asks, and we'll read about it as we study Wilson. He says that everybody says something about political science, but nothing about administration. That's why he started the discipline of public administration. Please understand this. Please understand this. Right? And so, generally, we say public administration includes all activities of all organizations which work for the welfare of people within the boundaries of rule of law. We are putting together a definition. We'll say this particularly because this is essentially what we call the scope of public administration. We'll be coming to that because now we are in definitions, meaning scope, meaning nature. We'll go to nature next, and then we'll go to scope, and then we'll come to the significance of public administration. Why is this? Yeah. So let's go to the difference between administration and management. You need to understand as a person who is interested in public administration, what is the difference between administration and management. So what is an organization in the first place? We have said that it's a physical structure that has different hierarchical levels, and administration are the activities performed by people at those different hierarchical levels, right? Simple. Physical structure, different levels. You people put that's organization. When you put people there and perform their activities, their functions, it becomes administration. What is management normally is associated, it's a synonym, but generally administration is associated with activities performed by the government, and management includes mostly the activities performed by the private sector, right? So let's have a look at the differences between administration and management. So we'll say that activities performed by government is known as administration. Activities performed by the private sector is known as management. In other words, some of the thinkers like Simon have said activities performed by people at the top is called administration, and activities performed by people at middle and lower levels is called management. Administration has everything to do with policy formulation. Management has everything to do with implementation. Administrators, the people in administrators are known as administrators, and people who manage are known as managers. And the administrators are also known as leaders, where the managers are known as managers. Very simple, right? So let's look at the evolution of organizations. I don't know how many have you read about this book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. It was published in 2014 as English edition, 2011 the Israeli edition, Hebrew edition. I suggest that you read it because it's interesting from a public administration point of view. And I've taken this particular slide from that. He says there are 3 revolutions that have happened. The cognitive revolution, because I want to place organization and public administration from the moment man came into being as a organized group of people. Earlier it was not. The Neanderthals and all of them died off. But then the Sapiens came around 2.4 million years back and slowly evolved. And the cognitive revolution, the ability to understand, read and write and etc. happened around 70,000 years ago. At least to understand, communicate, language, all those things and gestures came around 70,000 years. This is what Harari says. The agricultural revolution is as old as only 10,000, 20,000 years. That's the time they started staying at a place and started, having houses and living as a community, etc. But the scientific revolution is just 500 years old, right? 2020, 1500 AD is when we had the scientific revolution. Since then only we had this massive increase in populations and massive increase in communications and massive increase in technology, isn't it? So these are the 3 different revolutions. And finally, what Harari says is that man will become extinct. You're going to see man as an immortal thing because you're bringing in stem cell therapy, you're bringing in genetic engineering, all kinds of stuff. Please read this book. Not only this book, Homo Deus also you read, and one more book has come out. I forget the name of the book. I have not read that. So, as a public administration student, I command you to read this book. I request you to read. I want you to read because it's a very, very interesting read. And if you're not a heavy reader, I suggest you use an app called Audible or some app like that and just keep hearing it while you jog or run or walk. It's very interesting how he has constructed, although lots of critics are there, still a brilliant book to read. I suggest that you read that. So, during the evolution of organized civilization, human beings were nomads, food gatherers, hunters. They used to live in small groups to protect themselves from animals in nature. Primitive agriculture, moving from place to place, they never used to settle down. They were egalitarian societies. Why? Because there was no private property. They just moved from place to place. Everybody is equal, right? But then the discovery of iron, and then they realized that they can make weapons and they can keep animals at bay. They can start constructing small, safe places to live, etc. with the discovery of iron. So society moved from an egalitarian society to hierarchical societies. Now, there are people who are having land. Somebody is having 1 acre, somebody is having 10 acres, somebody is having 100 acres. They all go and take hold of their land and say, this is mine. Now they become rooted to the land. So that's where landlords developed. And those who are strong enough would take more land. And obviously, since they wanted to be together, they can't go to 100 kilometers ahead and pick up land. You'd stay together and say, okay, these are the landlords, we'll work in the land, till the land, right? This resulted in feudalism, right? There's no egalitarian society anymore. It's a hierarchical society, right? Landlords, then these landlords, when they having 10 acres, 20 acres, 100 acres, 100 square kilometers, etc., they go into what is called kingships. And then they will start conquests. They'll start trying to get more land, more people under control. They try to build empires, right? So that's why they are emperors. Now, king or emperor became the most powerful person. Please understand that. Everybody was beholden to this person. Now, all activities performed with the king or emperor came to be known as public administration. Please understand that. Because at that point of time, and we are talking about 5,000 years back, when you have recorded history, everything that the king did, what did the king do? Basically, it did only law and order. That is, maintain law and order within internal law and order, and prevent external conquest from other sides, enemies, etc., to keep the people safe. As more to keep himself safe and expand his empire. Second was,
If people are cultivating, they had to give 1/6 or 2/6 or 3/6 of their produce to the king. So these were the two things that the king ensured would happen. There was no welfare concept. There was no concept of what's called state or country or kinship or nothing like that. The king wanted to preserve his seat. He wanted to control areas. So whatever he did came to be known as public administration. So if you read Kautilya, Arthashastra, and that's part of your syllabus also, you will realize that he's writing more about how the king is performing his activities. He's talking about his ministers. He's not essentially writing anything about functions, etc. There are certain things that they keep repeating, and the whole idea was revolving around the king. So, how did the person become a king? By heredity or by conquest. They were not elected and hence not accountable to the people, right? But they would control the people. That's a very ironical thing. That is, I am not, you have not elected me, but I control you. Look at that. It's a very ironical thing, right? And they perform only two functions, law and order and revenue generation. So these were the basic functions you will see in many societies. And at that point of time, to keep people from revolting, etc., they would give them food for work. So if you look at many of the temples and big structures that were established, the Taj Mahal or the Tanjore Big Temple, all those huge erections were because people had to be kept engaged. Of course, some of them would go into agriculture, but not everybody is in agriculture. Not everybody needs to do agriculture to produce for the society. So the people had to be kept engaged, and they were given some food for work. Right? So, monarchy has existed for 5 years. Basically, two functions, regulatory functions, law and order and revenue generation. And, how this democracy came into being is very intriguing. So, if you read Bentham or if you read Stuart Miller, all those people who came out of these theories of social contract and the theory of the state or theory of nature, the state of nature, etc., they say that in nature, everybody is equal. It's serene. It's happy. But then they fight with each other, right? Because there's a fight for space, fight for food, fight for, human beings. All these things happen when man comes together, right? So, in political science, they say there's a social contract, an implicit social contract. So, if you look at a population of 1.3 billion in India, roughly 8 to 10,000 people are only ruling us. You take all the chief ministers, the prime minister, the cabinet ministers across the country, all the IAS, IPS, IFS, all the civil servants put together across India at any point of time, maybe 8 to 10,000, let's say 15,000, 20,000 people are ruling over the general population of 1.3 billion. So what is happening is here, 1.3 billion people minus 15,000 are telling these 15,000 people, okay, we can't govern ourselves. You govern us on our behalf. That's the implicit, unwritten social contract. It's another thing that, the social contract is breached on both sides. That's a different thing. But this is the basis of democracy itself. Earlier, it was not. There was no social contract. You conquer, and you basically take control of people's lives, right? So, in a monarchy, the people are recruited on the basis of the spoil system. That is, anybody close to the king will become part of the king's team, and it's called the spoil system. All powers. So there's no separation of powers. That's why we'll talk about law. The law, equality before law, right? We'll talk about that. So all powers, including legislative. So there's no separation of powers. Legislature, executive, judicial, all were vested in the hands of the king. The king was the judge, jury, and executioner in a sense. At that point. That's why he was extremely powerful, right? There was no rule of law. In rule of law, there are two things. One is everybody is equal before law. Second is you have your fundamental rights. This rule of law, etc., is part of democracy. It's not a part of monarchy. There was no rule of law. It's only spoil system. So, where is it? So, you have monarchy here. You have democracy. So, a slow process. And the administrative system was called the spoil system. Here, the administration system is called bureaucracy. Right? So you have to understand this. Monarchy and bureaucracy, monarchy and democracy. No rule of law. Here there is rule of law. That's the most important thing. No rule of law. Right? So you have to understand that anything said by the king is rule or law, becomes law. Sorry. Okay, let's move forward. So that brings us to what's called the scope. What is the scope of public administration? It is only regulatory functions. Scope was maintaining law and order, revenue administration. That's all. That is all that existed. Now you need to understand where it is. That's why when you write this answer and when you attempt questions on the scope of public administration, you need to understand it this way. The Industrial Revolution changed everything. And it brought in capitalism. And capitalism cannot be sustained with the spoil system. Capitalism cannot be sustained with monarchy. Capitalism can be sustained only with democracy. That's why the Industrial Revolution is such an important thing that has happened in human history. All of us are free today because the concept of democracy was evolved from capitalism to democracy, right? So Industrial Revolution transformed our societies in a very, very huge way, very dramatically, very dynamically. Dictatorship was replaced with democracy. In democracy, people are sovereign. That's the people have the freedom to decide the future course of action through the electoral process. People elect the representatives. These representatives rule the country on behalf of the people, which is part of the social contract. They stay in power as long as they enjoy the confidence of people. They lose after 5 years, they don't do anything. During the 5 years, they don't do anything. People will not elect them. Till they satisfy the needs and demands of the people, they will be in power. Right? So, the essence of democracy is the rule of law. Essence of rule of law is equality before law. Rule of law can be seen in the separation of powers. Legislature for lawmaking, executive for implementation, and judiciary for interpretation of those laws. Right? The emergence of democracy has expanded the scope of public administration. So you have to tell all this when you write the answer. So from capitalism, you talk about times immemorial. During the civilization started to monarchy, to industrial revolution, to capitalism. In between, you have to talk about feudalism, you have to talk about capitalism, you have to talk about democracy, and the democracy spawning what is called bureaucracy, etc. Right? So, public administration can be seen as an activity. That's you see IAS officers in action, it's public administration. When professors teach public administration, it's called a discipline. Or, some people are doing work within the collectorate. That's also public administration as a vocation. As a process, it's also public administration. As a synonym for management. And what is the nature of public administration? That's why we have the integral view. Henry Fayol is a French thinker. L.D. White. So anything to do with administration, right from the peon's work right up to the president's work, is public administration. And managerial view, Gulick and Simon said managerial view means only the top management. That is public administration. And in scope, there's what is called this post-cop view, which is come out with by Gulick. It's called the planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reviewing, and B is for budgeting. Right. Sorry. That's again a very narrow view. Subject matter view, which is again specialization, which is again almost like integral view, reducing the scope. Now, we'll come to what is the scope exactly. So, with the emergence of democracy, it is expanded multifold. Initially, they said all activities performed by the executive branch of the government is managerial. Is now anything which promotes public welfare of people.
welfare of
within
people
the
within the
law.
ambit of law. This is important. Anything which promotes. So it can be government, can be NGOs, it can be CSOs, it can be clubs, it can be any organization, volunteers. All these are public administration. That's why we are saying the scope, which is this much, that's expanded, and we can't. Waldo says, don't define public administration. The scope is unbelievably huge, right? So the scope is like massive. That's what you have to understand. This anything which promotes the welfare of human beings within the ambit of law, that's called public administration. So all the narrow views are rejected. Um, Let me rub this off. Right. Right. So the other thinker said that not only executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, all of that will come under public administration. That's called the integral view. This was also not considered sufficient. We kept on expanding the scope there. In the age of liberalization, privatization, globalization, all activities performed by the private sector should also come under the ambit of law. Private sector impacts the life of people through goods and services. Markets have become an integral part of our lives. Activities of multilateral institutions, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, International Monetary Fund, activities of transnational corporations, multinational corporations, non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, pressure groups. Public administration includes all activities of all these organizations. The development sector is influenced by all these organizations. Media, print, electronic, social media, any institution or organization which works for the people within the rule of law is public administration. So that is the scope. I hope you have understood because I have taken you through a very logical method. So we cannot define the boundaries. That's why Waldo said, please don't attempt to define public administration because you'll always be limiting its scope. It's forever expanding. See, 20 years back, I remember when I joined service, there was not much talk about environment. There was not talk about sustainable development goals. Information technology, possibly I was one of the pioneers. There was not many people who were talking about e-governance. Independent media, empowerment of women, non-governmental organizations. So anything from the womb to the tomb and even beyond is public administration. So you need to understand this scope which has increased from dictatorship to democracy because of the change from dictatorship to democracy, because of the change from feudalism to capitalism, because change from monarchy to democracy, right? Because the change from spoil system to bureaucracy. These are the changes. In democracy, citizens are king. In dictatorship, king is the king. Democracy, people give legitimacy to the administration, whereas dictatorship is through heredity and conquest. Democracy, rule of law. Dictatorship, rule of king. There is separation of powers. That's the essence of democracy. Among the legislative, executive, and judiciary in democracy, all judge, jury, executioner is a king. Democracy, the government of the day is accountable to the people. Dictatorship, not accountable. Democratic society, the politicians are elected. In dictatorship, is selected. Scope of public administration is huge in democracy. Scope is limited in dictatorship, right? So you need to understand how the scope is expanded because of what? Because of the move from feudalism to capitalism. From monarchy to democracy. From spoil system to bureaucracy. Right? You need to understand this. So that's the why the scope has increased from a small scope to now an ever expanding scope. Right? So, sorry, it's taking time. Um, 1 second. Right. So, what's the scope of public administration from a discipline point of view? That's from the academic discipline point of view. So, then you need to know about the organizational theories. And we'll be essentially learning from Prasad and Prasad 20 or 21 thinkers. You start with Taylor, then you go to Fayol, then you go to Weber, you go to Urwik and Gullig, then you go to Max Weber, then you go to Mary Parker Foley, then you meet Elton Mayo, then you meet Chester Bernard, Simon, Karl Marx, Gulick, Fred Riggs, comparative public administration, whole lot of thinkers, but mostly around 10th to 11th thinkers you have to study in detail. And that you will understand because we are taking you through a very, very logical step as we read about the thinkers, starting with Wilson, of course, can't forget Woodrow Wilson. So the organizational theories are there, the personal administration, how it has evolved, how the IAs is, kind of came into being, what they do from ancient times till today, how the civil service has now been organized. What is the role of comparative public administration? Because at some point, all the thinkers said, this is a closed system theory. That is, nothing will affect the theory. And these are universal theories. There's a science of administration. See, some of the things that you need to understand is, in public administration, they're always talking about what is called E, and E. Efficiency, economy, and effectiveness. Efficiency. The organizations exist to promote economy, efficiency, economy, and effectiveness in government administration. Second thing you will keep hearing is science of administration. Can administration be a science or is it an art? Our man administration. Our man who is Waldo says it's both a science and an art. The third thing we will see is principles of administration. And fourth thing that you'll hear is universal principles of administration. That is, all these principles, irrespective of place, person, or time. Place, person, or time will be proved to be true and is abjectly failed. That's why Waldo says these are all, Simon says these are all proverbs. It cannot be. Rick says you have to do comparative public administration. Wilson says you have to do comparative public administration because every society has social, cultural, technological, ecological subsystems. And your administration will definitely be affected by this. You can't say our theory will be so compact that it will be irrespective of place, person, or the theory of gravity is the same here and in Antarctica, right? That's why it's called universal. Whereas our thinkers were always saying it's a science of administration, the universal principles, etc. But the later thinkers said these cannot be universal, especially Waldo, Simon, etc. Right? So we'll be reading about these greats. I don't know, suddenly it's not working. Okay, anyways, we'll go to the next slide. Significance. So we are talking about the scope and we have come to the significance of public administration, right? So you look at this sentence of W.B. Donham. Very, very significant. W.B. Donham. It's not very easy to spell it, but you have to remember him forever. Very, very particular that you remember W.B. Donham. And I think he made a very, very significant statement. He says, if our civilization fails, it will mainly be because of the breakdown of administration. And you've seen that happening time and again. The Roman Empire. the Mughal Empire, the British Empire, all fell down because of the breakdown of administration. Now, what happens in Roman Empire? They go on innumerable conquests. What happens is you have only a certain amount of money, right? That's why I said you should always plan your funds or better budget. Now, 80% of the money was being spent on the armed forces. Now, if you don't keep them well fed and trained, they will kill the king, they will revolt. So, more and more time, more and more money has to be spent on the armed forces. That's why, and more conquests, the more conquests meant more deaths, more families to be taken care of, and all your money is going towards only this. That's why at some point of time you can't sustain this kind of budgeting. That's why they fail miserably. Oh my god, why is this not functioning now? Yeah, good. This itself can be used to rub off. Sorry about this. I'm also just getting used to this pen tab and how to work on it, right? So there's an inbuilt eraser which allows you to erase stuff. Right. So W.B. Donham is somebody you need to remember because we will not be speaking about him at any point apart from this. The whole conversation, the whole 150 hours that we'll be speaking to each other for the public administration class, which is the public administration optionals, which is a plus course. This is a free special class, right? You'll not be getting the entire course. So those who come into the plus course, throughout the conversation, we'll never hear W.B. Donham except this. But he made one of the most significant statements. If our civilization were to fail, it will be mainly because of the breakdown of administration. Great Roman civilization collapsed because of the failure of administration. Same with Mughal Empire and British Empire. So what happened to the British Empire? They were taking out all our money. $44 trillion is what they took out. And today India is trying to become a $5 trillion economy. India's wealth, it was one of the richest countries in the world. 30% of global trade, 30% of GDP, world GDP was India's. And when the British left, it was not even less than, it was less than even 0.5%. Right? So imagine that. 30% of GDP, global GDP, 31% of global trade. India was a very rich country. And the British took out 44 trillion US dollars. So I want to compare that. Now the government of India is trying to make it a $5 trillion economy. So this is 1947. This is 2021. So you can imagine the amount of wealth that was taken out of this country. It is humongous. It's massive. We should be angry, right? Now, what they did this for? So that they can sustain their very high level of lifestyle. So they took out all the money, all our wealth. And towards 1920s and 1930s, they realized that we cannot administer this huge country. And they had to pump in money. Then, of course, they went into war twice. The First World War and the Second World War. And, they lost men and material. And it's basically a bad scripting of your administration, right? So that's essentially what happened.
So basically, when you say development, why are certain countries called developed and certain countries called developing and certain countries called underdeveloped? Is because of the in terms of the governance and the administration. So if our India were to become a superpower, and we all want it to be, right? We our governance has to undergo huge transformation. Already, it's undergoing a lot of transformation. Technology we are adopting, we are bringing in management changes, etc. But the politics has not changed much, right? So we need to change the politics and the governance in a huge way to see our civilization develop, see our governance develop, see our nation prospering, right? That will happen only if people like you who go on to become IAS officers govern with no expectations. It will be complete seva. Ab seva hi karenge. Nothing more, nothing personal, right? So, what is the significance of public administration? Public administration becomes significant because of the actions performed by administrators. So, what do they do? So, today, let's assume that you're going to board a bus, or going to board a train, or board a plane. Who does all this? Bus can be government, it can be a private bus. Who does the regulation? It's basically government. So that regulation is basically what is called public administration. So if vehicles have to go in a particular route, and if they have to go by this particular time, that those activities are called public administration. So let's say you go to hospital, and all the activities there comes under public administration, right? You go in an auto rickshaw, that's public administration because autos are regulated by the transport department, right? They are not regulated. They will create havoc, right? So they had to be regulated. The other problem is over-regulation is also a problem, right? So maintenance of law and order. So you see the policeman on the road, you say that that's government because he's the most visible part of government. If you go to UK and all, you'll not find one policeman on the street because they use technology. I was told when I was in London, when I was studying at the London School of Economics, only in front of the 10 Downing Street where the Prime Minister of England lives, there was one policeman standing there, nobody else. So I said, how is that they maintain security? So they told me that an average Londoner is photographed around 55 times a day. So there's a lot of passive surveillance that happens. They use artificial intelligence to see criminals, etc., who are moving around. They locate them. No matter. They don't sweat and run after them. They just go and ensure that they sit in front of a computer. And then the teams will go and catch hold of them. Right? So today technology has evolved so much, especially the emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things, blockchain technology, drones, cloud, analytics, you name it. All those are now used in maintenance of law and order. And today, you don't actually need to send out your policemen. You see, I look at Chennai and say, oh my God, around 8,000 policemen and women are standing on traffic duty. I keep asking why? Why should we do that at all? Why can't we leave it to the citizens to undergo behavioral change through the signals, by erecting signals? Why can't we put these 8,000 people into better policing, better investigation activities? Because technology is there. And today, the moment you cross the red line when the red light is on, you can get an SMS saying that you're crossed. This is the first time you're crossing and you're creating a problem. Second time, third time, you lose your license. Right? It's possible today to control the whole thing with technology. Right? Generation of revenue. Today, how do you get revenues? From direct and indirect taxes. Direct tax like income tax, indirect taxes like GST, etc. All your revenues are to be taken care of by public administration, by the administrators. Because no organization can survive without money. Money is at the root of funding, financing is at the root of the heart of public administration. Right? Can you tell me one area where you can do without money? I can't see anything for everything. And you learn, as we study public choice theory, new public administration, new public management, etc., what bureaucrats and politicians do. They try to increase their budgets, maximize their budgets for two purposes. One is, of course, is it possible to get a cut out of it? Second is it possible to get more influence because you need, and because of the money that you have, the department. So if officers sit quietly, you'll not get any money. As an IS officer, I used to not only beg, borrow, and steal. I would fight with the finance secretary to get more money for my department. And since I used to innovate a lot, it's all there on my personal website. I used to innovate a lot. I needed more money, right? Because without money, you can't do an innovation. Innovation is all in the mind. So that's why if you look at the startups and all, what do the startups do? They do what's called a pitch before whom? Through an angel funding organization. So the angels fund the startups. And after some time, the startups grow a little and then they're funded by the venture capitalists. So without funding, you can't do a process or a product or a patent. You can imagine a thing, a service or a product or a process or patent, but it should remain in your mind only. If it has to come out, it has to be financed. That's why funding is very important. Formulation of policy. So public policy, there are three parts to public policy. One is policy formulation, policy implementation, and policy feedback. So this formulation of policy, all this have to be done by the public administration. They become significant because of the functions performed by the public administrators. Right, let me rub this off. Right. Maintenance of large-scale public sector enterprises. So this is very interesting because you will learn now that in the 1900s, 1900s, that the goods and services were provided by the private sector. Right? So all the goods and services provided by the government was looking at only revenue and law and order mostly. I'm talking about the US because they just undergone what is called the industrial revolution, and they had become prosperous. The Europeans and the Americans had all become prosperous. So they said that we'll unleash the power of the market and let citizens decide what they want. They'll have a choice, etc. But what happened in 1929 was a Great Depression. They invested so much in stocks that it from $5 million plunged to zilch. People committed suicide. So that's the time they realized we need to come back to government. So that's the time, 1930s to 1970s was a time of what is called the public sector enterprises. They were supposed to be the commanding heights. And we call it in the Mahalanobis, was India's chief statistical officer, commanding heights of the economy. So everything, all goods and services would be provided by the public sector enterprises. So what happens is the public sector enterprise becomes a monopoly. Right? Now what happens is when it becomes a monopoly, it spawns corruption. It spawns nepotism. All those things that you don't want in a democracy. In spoiled system, it was very clear. The spoiled system was spawning corruption, nepotism, all kinds of things that the society didn't want was happening because of the spoiled system. Now, the public sector enterprises, despite being in a democracy,
were spawning all these kinds of things. That's because it becomes the moment it becomes a monopoly, the publicity enterprises behave in a different way. And yesterday I was teaching for the other class. When what they do because of something called a Weberian bureaucracy, and we'll be reading about Weber, is that Weberian bureaucracy, Max Weber, Weberian bureaucracy. They are bureaucracy. They are concerned more with rules and regulations. So what happens is that by the time they do the rules and regulations, the patient dies. Operation successful, patient dead. So that's why they call it gold displacement. We'll read about this when we read about public sector and we read about the critique of Weberian bureaucracy. But what I was trying to say is maintenance of large public sector enterprises is done by the public sector, by the public administration. But at some point after 1970s, they said the public sector has become so bad, they're monopolizing the services, there's no quality and quantity, etc. So we should come back to what's called new public administration. And then there was an offshoot called the public choice theory, public choice approach. Then there's something called new public management. This is Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. These are two proponents of new public management and new public service. All these came into being because of the ill effects of public enterprises, large-scale public enterprises. Right? We're still going through what's called a good governance. Now we have gone beyond new public service to what's called good governance. Right? Sorry, I'm taking a little time to wrap it off because otherwise, the slides will look a bit awkward. My handwriting is not the most beautiful handwriting in the world. Right. Then, ensuring stability and continuity to governance during times of political instability. So you've seen, even after you've seen Pondicherry election. So the election was over as early as March 2nd when the results were announced. But since there was almost a hung assembly, it took almost 2 months for the haggling and the bargaining to happen and government to be established. But at the same time, society was continuing, governance was continuing, buses were coming on time, hospitals were running, people were coming on time. How? Because the bureaucracy maintains the machinery of government during all these times. That's why one of the questions asked in preliminary question paper some time back, I think it was in 2018, the role of bureaucracy, they said 4 things, and one was ensuring stability and continuity to governance during times of political instability. That is one of the options. So you please understand that when you listen to all this, you also need to understand that all this can be asked in the preliminary exam also, right? So you need to understand this in its entirety. Allocation of resources. As I said, public administration is all about planning because the resources are scarce. You have to plan it well. That's why when we go to the finance secretary, in every year, sometime when the budget is announced, we go to the finance secretary as a secretary to the government, and you go with your HODs and then give your what's called the wish list. So straight away he'll say, he'll tick straight away on that piece of paper. He also needs to give a piece of paper and say, out of 100 items that you give, just take 10 items. This I'll do, this I'll do. Rest he'll say no. And how much ever you fight with him, he may, because of your charisma or because of your persuasive power, he may include 1 or 2. But the rest, plus 82 have to go. 88 have to go. Because all cannot be approved because of lack of funding. There's so much only that's being collected as indirect taxes, right? The central government only collects the direct taxes. The state government collects some of the indirect tax as state GST, etc. Right? Even that goes to the government of India, it comes back as allocation. So you have to be extremely careful with your financing. Implementation of policies and programs. So what happens in public administration is how does this policy come into being? So you need to understand the process. So generally, there's a place called in India, a place called in every state secretariat. So you look at the state government. This is where the chief minister and the council of ministers sits. This is where all the secretaries also sit. Okay, now this is where policy is finally approved. But policy originates where? Policy originates in the manifesto or the party or some department HOD will come out of the thing. So whatever it is, the HOD. So under let's say IT department, there will be some department which is called LCOT, e-governance agency. So there will be different HODs headed by different IAS officers. So they have to provide the basic material for us to come out with a policy. So they come out with proposals. Let's say they come out with 10 proposals. All these 10 proposals go to the secretariat and be seen by the secretary. Secretary will send it to his team of deputy secretary, under secretary, additional secretary, etc. So under secretary, deputy secretary, additional secretary, etc. And their team will go through this, vet it, and send it to the finance department. Informal finance department. Why does it go to the finance department? Because they have to finally initially say whether it's possible at all. If they say no, that's the end of the proposal. If they say yes, then you as a secretary will ask your people to start preparing what's called a circulation note. So it file has two parts. So it's called the current file and the note file. On the note, it's called the circulation note. It's basically meant for the chief minister and the other secretaries, chief secretary, etc. So circulation note will say this HOD has sent this proposal based on the manifesto or based on their own proposal, etc., etc., etc. It will involve this kind of money. This is what is the objective. This is what it will be achieved, and this may kindly be approved. It has been examined in finance, and finance has agreed to it. Once finance has agreed to it informally, then it goes to as a circulation note, and at the end of the circulation note, it will be signed by my team. If I'm the, let's say, the secretary, where does it go into limbo? Oh, I'm rubbing it on the computer, that's the problem. I had to rub it here on the. So once the circulation note is prepared, it's a very beautiful looking document. The circulation note will be signed by my deputy secretary or the secretary and the secretary, etc., dealing with it. Then it comes to me as a secretary. I will sign it. Then from me, it goes to the finance secretary. And the finance secretary may deem it fit to send it back to his team if he has some queries. Otherwise, he'll send it back to us, or he'll straight away sign it. Then it may have to go to the law secretary. And from the law secretary, it goes to the chief secretary. It goes to the chief secretary, and from the chief secretary, it goes to the minister with the IT department, with the IT minister. It will be then from the IT minister, and from the IT minister. Then once the chief minister signs, it becomes what is called once the CM signs, it comes back to the department. It comes back to the department, and we'll write what is called draft government order. Right. So this draft government order is what is to be implemented back by the HODs. So this is basically policy. All policies have to be broken down into what is called government orders, right? So that becomes the policy. So realizing the objective, implementation of policies and programs. I just gave you a gist of how it works inside the secretariat. I was a principal secretary, Information Technology, Government of Tamil Nadu in 2018-20. I was also Secretary IT in 2011. So, you can take it as it from the horse's mouth. This is the way it's done. Then realizing the objectives of socio-economic transformation. So this is one thing you need to remember. When post-industrial revolution, there was absolute prosperity in Europe, in US, Europe, etc. But in the colonies, it was abject poverty. So prosperity here, poverty here, right? So all these people had to only maintain their public administration the way it was already. Whereas we had to glean out a different public administration, because if you had maintained them, you will be maintaining poverty, you will be maintaining illiteracy, insanitation, ignorance, lack of infrastructure, in effect, all the ills of society. That's why India went out with what is called the five-year plans. You can always say it was bad. It was retrospect. At that point of time, there's the most ideal thing to do, because we didn't have much money. We had to prioritize and undergo massive industrial revolution and agricultural revolution, so that we'll be a surplus nation, both in terms of forex and in terms of food, right? So they had to go through that perforce. So that's why we came out with what's called socio-economic development. So if you look at the development in the US, Europe, and other countries, you'll not find the word socio-economic development, because they are already developed, they had already prospered. They had to only maintain the society in that particular level. Whereas we had to go from scratch and achieve what we have achieved today, right? Then ensuring active participation of citizens in the process of development and growth. That's again an essence of democracy also. You just don't leave them and say that, we have signed the social contract, 8,000 of them will rule us. No, they had to actively participate. So if you see now the debates on television, the debates on social media, etc., there's a humongous participation of the citizens in this process of governance, right? Everybody has an opinion. The opinion is his. It matters to him. It matters to her. And we have no fear to give our opinions, air our opinions. And some of these opinions are very significant. Those are taken on board by the government, right? Then influencing public opinion in favor of the government, so that citizens can participate in the development process, right? PubAd can be seen as a discipline, administrative specialty, institution, and activity. The discipline helps the institution of the state to perform an activity efficiently. This is heavily contested by the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats say we don't need any training by the public administration specialists. Whereas public administration specialists say they need it because they had to sharpen their axe. And if you see many of the things like CPM or what's called the PERT chart, etc., performance review, etc., it's because the public administration specialists, the academic disciplines given these, the administrators have not come out of them. Some of the administrators come out of it. For example, I used to be very good on e-governance, right? Theoretical developments have been taking place during the Mauryan, Mughal, and British times. There was only evolution of public administration in terms of the evolution of state, and not as a discipline. So, if you look at public administration, so from, let's say, take 5,000 years back till today, 2021. This whole time is public administration happening. But as a discipline, it is only last 100 years. As a discipline. That's what you're trying to say, right? Public administration helps with tools and techniques in overcoming performance challenges. Performance challenges can be the structure, administrative issues, efficiency issues. You're creating single window systems, citizen charters, tools and techniques. Then people and behavioral changes can bring. Administrative lack can be overcome. So all these performance challenges. So what are the performance challenges? Can be structure, administrative issues, efficiency issues. So public administration as a discipline came into being to overcome these performance challenges.
Once the sovereign state was established, and we are talking about the 1900s, it had a social contract of people. 16th to 18th century saw the Industrial Revolution, rise of democracy, capitalism, population explosion. And the popular feeling was that the state should exist for the welfare of the people. Earlier it was said that the monarch is basically a descendant of God. In fact, many of the big thinkers of the 16th century thought like that. And people also, like in North Korea now says, the president there is a direct descendant of God. That's how they see it. That's how they are trained and brainwashed. And the first written constitution was in the USA in 1789. And look at that, 1789. And when did public administration come into being as a discipline? After 1889. So let's say 100 years almost. It took for it to become a public administration as a discipline. In India, first administration took place followed by constitution development. In US, it's constitutional development that happened first and then administration. So actually, India should have been better administered, because if you look at many of the countries in Europe, they had first administration, and administration was used by the monarchs to keep the people happy. They didn't want any irritation to be caused to the people. To preserve their own positions, they used administration, and public administration in Prussia and all were world class. That's why Woodrow Wilson went to learn. He actually went there, learned the language to understand what these guys were talking about public administration. When the state came into being, the idea was to respond to people's welfare efficiently. Easier said than done. Society had become complex. Thanks to democracy, industrialization should be reversed. Industrialization, capitalism, democracy, bureaucracy. Today is much more complex. Public administration as a discipline came into being because of the above complexity. Legislature, executive, judiciary. So what are the differences between public administration? Let me see how many more slides are there. Oh, I just went a bit slow. The differences are public administration is welfare maximization, private administration is profit maximization. Laws operate on the basis of laws and rules. Public administration operates on private administration is more flexible. There's a political direction. There's an overlay of politics on administration. That's why it's very significant. Whereas in the private administration, it's more or less a board. Then there's the principle of uniformity in public administration. There's a preferential treatment in public administration, private administration. High public scrutiny because administration is beholden to the people, account to the people. Minimal public scrutiny in private. Tenure is not secure. Suddenly you're a district collector, suddenly you're thrown out. Not so. The monopoly of government is there in public administration. There's no competition in private administration. Efficiency is slightly lower in public administration. Private administration is superior. Political context, that's the most important thing. Paul Appleby said 3 things. And these 3 things are the most important thing. One is the political context present in public administration is absent in private administration. Scope, impact and consideration, massive, unlimited in public administration. Scope, limited, low impact in private administration. Externalities, a very, very important thing for you to understand. You build a dam, you're not really building a dam, you are evacuating people, right? You are dislocating people. They are losing their jobs. These are negative externalities. So public administration has to deal with negative externalities. Not too many negative externalities happen in private administration, right? So in public administration, public accountability is its hallmark. Consistency of treatment is its watchword, and consciousness of community services its ideal. And we need multidimensional skills. Private administration, unidimensional skills. Information has to be disclosed in public administration, need not be disclosed in private administration. Responsibility and accountability to the people is there. And here in private administration is restricted to within the organization. So now, you've seen the differences. You need to understand that we are all moving towards what's called a synergy. That's why there's something called a public-private partnerships, right? You learn the best from the private administration, the efficiency, economy, effectiveness, and try to put it in the public administration. Public administration is social consciousness. You take and put, because in private administration, it's basically the bottom line. Or what do you call as profits.
In public administration, it's basically welfare. So, if private administration takes welfare also as one of the objectives, then what happens is their profits can increase because now more and more people are getting interested in getting a bigger market, right? So we are now looking at synergies, right? It's very important as you study public administration how these synergies come into play. Private organization looking at welfare, public organization looking at efficiency. New public, that's why we'll talk about new public management. And now you need to understand all this, that's all. So in order to maximize their strengths and minimize their weakness, public and private organizations come together, leading the emergence of the concept of public-private partnership. Private sector knows that unless prosperity of people is not ensured, they cannot maximize their profits. Welfare maximization government can be done only by improving efficiency of government. So it's both ways. Organizational structure is similar. Both of them follow the same principles, etc. A group of administrative thinkers like Fayol, Foley, Gulick, Lindahl do not make a distinction between public and private administration. It is the same. And it's undesirable to separate public from private administration. There's much common between the two, and the difference is only of degree, not of kind. The managerial techniques and skills of planning, organizing, coordinating, controlling are the same. Both are organized on the basis of the principles of hierarchy. Both have uniformity in accounting. Both are influenced by the practices and standards of each of them. So, Fifner and Prestes have described the emergence of public corporations as halfway house between commercial prototype and traditional government department. Both have similarities so far the problems of organizations. So, as far as the organization is concerned, they have similar problems, both the private sector and the public sector. How personnel are selected, trained, how finance is managed. So what we are saying is there are diminishing differences only. So economy, efficiency and effectiveness along with profitability is expected in government sector also. Right? The informal organizations like community-based organizations, NGOs, which were in the private domain, almost the private domain, now come and participate in the development process. And the private sector functioning along market lines and regulatory function in government and takes functions that have been prorogated to the public sector. Now you look at the vaccination process in COVID. COVID vaccination. Who does it? Government does it. The private hospitals does it. The NGOs does it. Right? So earlier all this vaccination used to be done only by the government sector. Now, so that's why there's synergy, right? Now we are actively telling government, private organizations, NGOs, come and collect the vaccine. You apply to the vaccine producer directly, take the vaccine. That's the way it has come. Time was when we never trusted the private sector or never trusted the NGOs. Now we all need to come together. Why? Because we need to ensure the welfare of humankind under the ambit of law. Right? That's why these are all different aspects or different facets of public administration. That's why the scope is massive. So, apart from this, the private sector functioning along market lines and the regulatory framework of government undertakes functions that have been the prerogative of the public sector. We can thus conclude that in many ways the differences between public and private administration are diminishing. They complement and supplement each other. So, now let's conclude. Come to the last slide. So what you have to understand is the last 100 years, the role of the state has been undergoing massive change. We were what's called an Inspector Raj. Because of our public sector enterprises, commanding heights of the economy. And what is called the trickle-down theory. This is equally large-scale public sector enterprises. And obviously, corruption, nepotism, inefficiency, wastage, all this happened. And they say Narendra Modi, who is the chairman of Infosys, he said he went to Delhi 50 times to take hold of a computer which they had used. One computer. You should watch this interview. He says you should watch this interview. Delhi from Bangalore, go to Delhi from Bangalore 50 times to get hold of the computer. Because he had to answer the peon, he had to answer the undersecretary, deputy secretary, all kinds of people, because they had a stranglehold on the economy. And we came to such a pass that we had to sell our gold in UK Treasury to pay for our foreign exchange, forex requirements, obligations, forex obligations, because there was not much money even to buy 2 weeks of petroleum. We are in such a bad state. The commanding heights of the economy and the licensed Raj had destroyed our enthusiasm, energy, and all kinds of stuff. So that we should be thankful that it happened, because there was no other way. Otherwise, we'd have gone further down. And we opened up our economy through what we call LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization, 1992.